Hey, hey, Lauren.
Hi, David. How are you?
Good. They're like painted in my building this weekend, and so it smells like paint.
Oh, that doesn't sound that nice.
No. Plus, I have no windows, so there's no way to air it out.
Uh, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that bad, but I'm feeling it a little bit in my head now.
hmm
I'm kind of keeping an eye on the attendees because I don't think Michelle was able to send out the direct link for panelists. How did you get in?
I signed up like Jordan did, and like put my name and email address in with like the usual registration link. But I texted Michelle and she said that she had just sent it out. So
Okay. That's what she just said.
Mhm.
As you said that, she sent me sent. Okay. So we don't have any audience yet, but we are recording. We don't have a huge audience, I think, today anyway. We got like 15 people sign up.
That's okay.
That's fine.
They'll be educated.
Yeah. Plus, it'll be recorded and posted. Hi, Emily. Not that you can say anything. I guess you can chat. Where are you, Kelsey?
Hello, I am outside of Black Frog Coffee, where I pretty much always am.
Aha.
But I just realized it's Sunday in the office.
Okay, we do need Larry. Larry is normally the first one to show up. I will text Larry. I don't know how to make it possible for you to see who all is in attendance, to be honest. It's a small audience today, though. We're just waiting on Larry so we can get started. Oh, and there he is. All right, we have everyone here, so I want to welcome everyone to the Davis City Desk monthly webinar. I'm David Greenwald, the founder and director of the Davis Vanguard, and I'm now going to turn it over to our hosts, Lauren and Jordan, who are co-editors of the Davis City Desk for our student publication. So welcome everyone, and take it away, Jordan and Lauren.
Hi, welcome everyone to the Vanguard webinar series where we focus on culture and politics around Davis. I am one of your hosts, Jordan Varney, and with me is my co-host and co-editor, Lauren Smith. Lauren and I, like David said, are the student editors of the Vanguard City News Desk. We are lucky to be joined today by two guests who are doing influential and important work in Davis. So would you like to introduce yourselves and talk a little about what you do in Davis? We can go Kelsey and then Larry.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jordan. And thank you guys for having us. This is such an important conversation that we're having today. I ran for city council this past November. And I also am finishing up my PhD in economics with a focus on energy and transportation at UC Davis right now. I'm also a board member for Bike Davis and Cool Davis. So I definitely get my fill of thinking about the environment and Davis. I also am a member of YOLO Climate Emergency Coalition, which is focusing more holistically on YOLO County. Yeah, so keeping myself really busy, putting off doing that dissertation as long as possible by thinking about Davis instead.
All right, nice. I'm Larry Guenther. I am no longer chair of the Davis Tree Commission. We had elections, our last meeting on Thursday, and so that has rotated out. But I am president of the Old East Davis Neighborhood Association. I am on the board of Tree Davis. I'm secretary of the Davis Odd Fellows. I'm back volunteering building raptor cages at the Raptor Center, and just very concerned, thank you, about Davis, about my environment and how we change as things are changing. I was definitely one of the ones who was awakened in the Great Awakening, and have since then, talking to people, reading, looking at things, the the issues of social equity, social justice, and environment have, they're like, oh, they're overlapped, if not the same. I mean, it's everything in our culture obviously is interconnected at some level, but redlining, greenlining, all those things, and today trees, environment are very much a part of our culture, and so they're part of the disparities in our culture as well. So talking about that and trying to mitigate that and change it to improve it, I think is really crucial. Thanks. Oh, I should say all those organizations, probably Kelsey the same, I don't know, but I'm speaking as Larry Guenther, not for any of those organizations. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. As the panelists kind of mentioned, we're going to be discussing environmentalism in Davis and its intersectionality with racism, sexism, and socioeconomic disparities. So the first half of this event will be questions from us, and then the second half we will be asking audience questions. I see people are already putting them in the chat, so thank you so much for doing that, and we will address those later on. So our first question is about shade cover in Davis. I know a lot of places there is like socioeconomic disparity in who has access to trees and who has access to shade cover. Do you feel like that's happening in Davis? If it is it being addressed? What are your feelings?
Do we just jump in, or are you gonna ask?
No, you can just jump in. It will end up being kind of a conversation. So
okay. There absolutely are disparities. Community members have been sending me stuff, including pictures, satellite images from Google and whatnot, about different areas in Davis and the different tree cover. And as someone who's lived in Davis 26 years, there are definitely areas that have a lot more trees and some that don't. And sometimes this is correlated with socioeconomic, and sometimes it isn't, but it often is. So Tree Davis has a grant. One of the things that's being done to try and address that, Tree Davis is working with the city of Davis on a grant, Community Canopy, to plant 1,000 trees in Davis. And there was a big part of that grant is planting trees, A, that are climate ready, and B, that are going into underserved neighborhoods and going to people who need the trees more. And surprisingly or not, that has been a lot of the poor neighborhoods in Davis, people on the lower end of the economic spectrum. So there is a lot of work to do. There is disparity in Davis, and the first step, right, is recognizing that and determining where the needs are, and then trying to address those.
Yeah, so tree cover is going to be really highly correlated with a lot of other things, including socioeconomic status in a lot of cases. And a lot of that is actually due to other things that we put in place of trees and the policies around building. So, when we're building lower income residences, there's a lot more concern about costs. And so there may not be as many preventative measures to protect the current trees in that area. It's cheaper just to get rid of them. Whereas if you're building $1 million home, oh, well, we want those old, beautiful trees to be in our yard. And so, and that is a desirable thing that someone would be looking for. And so, it comes back to how our planning process is happening and what we require from builders. It's also going to come back to the fact that, when you're talking about a single family residence, you're often talking about having a garage or carport for your car. Whereas in areas with lots of rentals, you're going to be seeing big parking lots. And that is going to limit your ability to grow green stuff if you're going to fill it with asphalt. And so, yeah, I think that, you know, to be honest, Davis should be asking for a lot more when we see developers come in and want to build these, you know, large apartment complexes. We should have high standards. You know, owning property in Davis is very lucrative. And so we should be, you know, we should be asking for these things. Absolutely. Another thing that, you know, that is true is that, well, if you're in say close to the downtown, you need less parking, right? Because people don't need their cars as much as, say, someone who lives on the edge of town who, well, I guess I could bike 3 miles to get everywhere I want to go, but I could also just drive my car. And so you're going to see, you know, if we have apartment complexes, if we compare apartment complexes that are closer to where people want to be, you're going to see a lot less need for that space for vehicles and space for roads. One of the things that Bike Davis has been really focused on is how wide our roads are in Davis. We give so much space to private vehicles for free. And then you'll see bike lanes that are, you know, partially gutter area, and sometimes they just disappear. And where car lanes sometimes exceed 15 feet, even though in our city standards, there's a max of 10. And, you know, so if we can convince the city staff to, whenever we're repaving a road, to have the first question be, can we narrow this road? Can we give less space to the vehicle? Because that's not only good for the environment because it gives us more space for green stuff, it also discourages driving. And that's something that we're gonna have to think about as we're going forward. It makes it a lot more comfortable to bike and walk if you're not next to 4 lanes of traffic going 35 and a 25.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads really nicely into our next question, which is about urban planning and the environment. So how can we incorporate green spaces? How can we promote sustainable housing practices? And what kind of building codes favor green technology?
So I think that, you know, one of the things we should be looking at when we think about living in our quite warm, dry climate is the fact that shade is really nice, right? And so we should be trying to get as much of that as possible. Now, tree cover is one way to do it, and I love seeing all the green. But the other thing that gives a lot of shade is if you put buildings a little bit closer to the sidewalk and build them a little taller. If you look at places that weren't built around the private vehicle and have similar climate to us, say something like a southern Spain, where, you know, it regularly reaches 100 degrees in the summer, just like here, and they've got that heat, and all the buildings are, you know, very close together. The streets are narrow. You know, a lot of the downtown centers just don't even allow private vehicles, right? They are, you know, they're not friendly to those type of things. And all of the buildings will be these multi-use, where you've got the cafe on the first floor and apartments up above, so that you get this 4 stories on both sides of the street. And so then you only have sunshine on the road for maybe an hour of the day, because the buildings don't allow the sun to actually reach the ground. And so it keeps everything really nice and cool. And it's funny to look at these buildings where, you know, people live there and don't have air conditioning. And I cannot imagine being in Davis without air conditioning. I did it my first year here, and it was not to my liking. And so, you know, I think when we talk about bike infrastructure, we often look to places like the Netherlands for their beautiful bike design and bike culture. And when we don't really do that so much for urban planning in Davis, it feels like we don't look to other places that have similar characteristics to us, where we could say, oh, you know, maybe a downtown where we have a little bit narrower roads and a little bit more, you know, shade, not only from trees, but from the buildings, could be really, really useful and make it a lot more comfortable to say, sit outside like I am right now in the middle of the afternoon.
Yeah, and I think, so zoning and planning are actually really key. We've kind of, and I grew up in the suburbs, in the fastly sprawling, the rampant sprawling suburbs of the South Bay. My dad was an engineer in the aerospace industry in the 60s. And so we were part of that group of people who came across the US and displaced fruit orchards with housing, single and two-story, but single family housing with, you know, streets. And here's the key, no business that sold goods or services within, I mean, there was maybe 3/4 of a mile away, there was a 7-Eleven, right? So, and so I do this all the time, and I'm not gonna apologize. Oldies Davis is, to me, what planning ought to be. So we've made this paradigm where the ne plus ultra of living in comfort and safety and all is this suburban neighborhood without any goods or services. So you have to drive everywhere. I mean, you don't have to if you have a lot of time. As the saying goes, every place is within walking distance if you have enough time. But what people are going to do habitually is, if they have to go more than a mile, they're going to drive, right? So Old East Davis has everything in it. It has goods and services. It has churches. It has businesses. We've got a bodega that sells fruits and vegetables, right? We've got window screen business. We've got the SPCA thrift, thankfully. I've shopped there probably more than any other business in Davis in the 26 years I've been here. So we've got all these things. We've also got a really wide array of residential. We've got really large, old single family historic homes on pretty large lots. But we also have multifamily dwelling apartment buildings that are both affordable capital and lowercase affordable a. So we are affordable housing. So we've got people who walk to downtown to work. We've got people in our neighborhood who walk to work in the neighborhood. And we have people that work on campus that drive and that walk and bike to campus. So if you want to, and there's a lot of this like, oh, if we just electrify all the vehicles, then we've solved the climate problem. It's not true. If we keep the paradigm of everybody has their own car and goes everywhere they go alone in a car, even if we switch all those to electric vehicles, we have not made the impact that we're going to need to make to change our effect on the climate, right? So the way to do that is to build densely, or certainly more densely, and to have goods and services spread out within a neighborhood. And I can tell you that businesses are actually great neighbors. They're usually not there after 5 o'clock. They're almost never noisy. I mean, there's someone there during the day. If, like in my case, both people in our family work during the day, there's someone around. They're really nice. And we can walk to a lot of businesses. So that's really nice. Also, shade is more than nice, right? We actually don't use our AC much in the summer because at least the east side of our house is completely shaded by trees. It's really nice, and it really reduces the need to have to use AC. The house is also designed, the number of windows that let in natural light, the number of windows we have, we can get cross ventilation and ventilation at night when it does cool down, really reduces the need for AC, precisely because this house was built before there was AC. So they had to deal with it in a different way. So, my point, and I do have one, is that zoning and building code are really, really key, in fact. Someone on a webinar earlier this week said that the city can't do much about cars. I absolutely disagree. I think the city can do more than anything. By building, by zoning neighborhoods that allow multi-use, we can really, really reduce the amount we depend on the car. Also, building in places where our transit infrastructure already exists will really go a long way to reducing the need of the automobile. I'll leave it there for now.
I have a follow-up question. I think it's really interesting when you when we think about building closer buildings together, there's higher density of buildings, and how that interacts with the value of privacy in this country. With closer buildings together, you know, people will theoretically have less privacy, and that's a really high value. So how do you kind of grapple, and how do those two things really interact with each other?
That's true. When I think about these European cities where the buildings are much closer together, you know, there is more of a culture of having part of your life be in that public sphere, be in that public space where you know, you don't have your own yard. And so the parks are always popping. And I love that. And I think it really brings together community. And so, you know, it's a trade-off that I am totally willing to make. And I think that, you know, Davis will always offer both options, right? We're not going to eliminate these single family homes with their fenced backyard, private backyards, 6 feet tall. So you never see your neighbor, and you never, you know, you never have to interact with anyone around you. But a lot of people want more of that community. And I think that if you offer it, you know, there are lots of people who want that. And there are lots of people who don't even know that that's a choice that they're making. That this value on privacy is not really something that they're choosing. It's something that they've been told to choose. And if they were offered another option and they actually had a chance to try it out, you know, I think again, you have to push for these cultural shifts so that we can get where we need to be.
Yeah, and cultural shift, I think that's actually, Kelsey, I think that's really kind of the point at the end of the day, is these communities and cultures that already exist with more dense housing. They have more of a community culture, and you develop these norms where you can maintain privacy even while living close and in the same space. So that double-edged sword, like, okay, we now have privacy. That's kind of a good thing, and we like that. The double-edged sword of that is we have less community, right? Especially, I think a huge part of it is because building, especially tract homes and stuff, did become so car-centric that what's on the front of the house? The garage. Right. And so how many people spend time in their front yard? Like the number of friends I have that started gardening in their front yards, and we're like, oh my, I met all my neighbors. It's amazing. They stop. Right. And so we've got this kind of isolationist and this kind of rugged individualism that we love, and that's a huge part of our identity in the US, has this other side that's not as pleasant, and that is this lack of community. And I you know, I'll say community probably six or 7,000 times today. I say it a lot, but it's super important to me. And I think that at heart, call me going from the sublime to the ridiculous, but I think that's actually what is one of the big issues we're having in our nation, is that we're not behaving as a community, right? We're behaving in this kind of teams, and it's not working. I don't know if anybody else has noticed, it doesn't seem to be working. So improving community comes from people having a sense that they're actually together. And again, people, part of our garden space is out near the sidewalk, and people stop by while we're in the garden, and they stop and they chat, and it's really, really nice. And then, oh, I know them. Hey, there was someone in your backyard, a couple weeks ago. Really? Okay, thanks for letting me know, right? Like, people keep an eye on each other because they're connected, because of that connection. So I think that privacy, again, privacy is a double-edged sword, and we've gotten used to it. We've gotten used to, as Kelsey kind of also mentioned, kind of being told that was the best thing. I think there are other things, and I think moving toward those other things is a good idea.
Yeah, thank you. I haven't thought about community like that before in terms of the way that I live. And so I'm like, well, this is a big galaxy brain moment for me. So as we talk about, the changes that we could see in Davis, or the way that Davis could orient around housing in the environment, are there people that you feel like get shut out of the environment conversation in Davis? And like, how can, in planning processes, the city engage more unheard voices?
Yes. Yes, we have a problem, and that's that the city does not engage with renters. I know that there's a lot of effort to get public input, but if your public input is really biased, then it's not actually going to improve things. And so we see that in public comment in city meetings, but we can also see it in the choices that end up occurring in the end. Renters are 60% of Davis, and it's not just students. I was, baking banana bread with my neighbors outdoors last night because I have some little kids who live in an apartment near me. And so, I took all the ingredients outside and we made banana bread. And I love that I get to know some of my neighbors, and, they have no connection to the university, but there are quite a few people who are renters in Davis who don't actually have a whole lot of connection to the university. And we kind of ignore them altogether. I think, the other thing that we don't do well is engage with the university community who's renters. As much as Davisites don't necessarily want to admit it, most of the people who live here either grew up here or came here because of the university. Lots of grad students stay, lots of undergrads stay, and then they become, Larry as an example, me as an example, I plan to stay on Davis after graduating. And then we kind of, it's an us versus them thing for a lot of people of the true Davisites and the university community. And so I think that, actually engaging with the people who are going to be living here in 5, 10, 15, 20 years because they came and they love it, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think one of the aspects that that doesn't get talked about a lot with privilege is time. So when I was living hand to mouth in Davis, I was not on the tree commission. I was not on the board of Tree Davis. I wasn't volunteering at the Raptor Center. I wasn't in the Odd Fellows. I was trying to get to the next month. And that's huge. Another thing is that I can say is that the change in the way we disseminate information and communicate that's occurred in the last 30, 40 years. It's been a slow change, but now it's really tough. So having been on the downtown plan advisory committee, the consultant that was in charge of community outreach, public engagement, I think they actually did a great job, and it still wasn't enough. I mean, I talked to people at the end of that process that the people engaged in the community now, not just, somebody, I don't know, but who are like, really? The city's doing what? I mean, it is really, really difficult in this day and age to get the word out and to get people engaged. Having said that, and I won't go on a rant, but I think the city does not do a great job at outreach and engagement. And especially because they've had some really good examples, like the consultant, the downtown plan, the Day Respite Center leaps to mind on opportunities of neighborhood and community engagement that were really lost. But again, that time thing, people have time. I have time because of my station in life, and so I'm able to commit time to these things, but a lot of people don't. A lot of people are trying to just get through. So we have an apartment complex down the street, and as you mentioned, Kelsey, that a lot of the people in there are not students. Several of them work downtown in the food industry, and they don't have the time to be engaged for 4 or 5 years and then get asked onto a webinar, right? Like, they just don't. And so getting how to get them engaged, how to reach out to them, it's rugged, it's tough. But I think it's totally worth the effort, because we are missing this voice. And if we keep dipping from the same well, we keep getting the same voices, and guess what? We don't change much, and we keep losing this other part of our community that really needs to be heard. So how to do that? Everybody needs to pull together on that wagon. I mean, we all need to reach out to people that aren't getting reached out to. And once people start to get involved, right, it's then where to click, and what sites to follow, and what email list to get on. And I think the other thing that really, really is important that I think the city could do a lot more with is the commission system. The commission system, ideally in a perfect world, is the conduit, the liaison, if you will, between city leadership and the community. And there are a lot of commissioners, but again, how many of them are white and retired, right? Because they have time. It's this privilege thing. Yeah, seriously. I was listening to a podcast where this gentleman was talking about this .org that he runs, and he was Black and male, and he helped Black children, get post K through 12 education. And he said it straight out. He said, who is the demographic most likely to help the people I help? A white female retired. Done. Like, it's because they have time. They have time, they have the resources to commit time to other things. So that's a huge thing. So getting the commissions to reach out and getting more diversity on the commissions, that is a great step.
Yeah, so YCEC spends a lot of time thinking about this in particular, and about getting input from underrepresented communities. And the one big thing it comes back to is just time, right? And so the way that we're thinking about it is to actually pay people for their time, to actually, rather than having commissions only be volunteers, to have an opportunity for people to have a stipend for the work that they're doing, the very important work that they're doing. And so as the county is putting together its commission on climate, that's something that we're really pushing for, is for those people to have the opportunity to have a stipend, so that we can get better representation, so that someone who wouldn't have time to volunteer their time it can be worth it for them. and they can do this thing that they would want to do, but they just can't do it for free. I think, I think that's really important if you want to engage the student population who really cares about city matters and things too. I probably spend 20 plus hours a week volunteering right now. If I could get paid for a little bit of that would be awesome, because I love it and that's why I do it. But I'm low on time, and and right now it's because this is what's really rewarding to me, and that's what I've decided to do. But that's not what you're encouraged to do when you're in school. I've kind of given up on pleasing anyone in the university system and said, this is what I want to do with my time, and you can't stop me. But grad students and undergrads are really encouraged to spend their time on their studies. And grad students in particular, if you are doing things outside of working on your research, you are made to feel very bad about that, guilty for every minute you spend that isn't just on your research, because that should be your life. And I mean, for most of us, it's not.
Anyway, go ahead.
Oh, just a reminder, we're going to switch to audience questions soon. So if you have questions, you should put them in the chat. Yeah, I feel like we've kind of been circling like classism and like how that plays out in Davis. And I just wanted to follow up, with environmental racism and classism, how do you feel like you see it really strongly? Is there equitable access to affordable, healthy food, things like that? What are the major issues you see going on in Davis?
So from the point of having spent some time in nonprofits that are working on this type of thing, I know I can be critical of the city and say the city should be doing more to get people involved and serving people who are underrepresented. The same is true for nonprofits. I'm on the board of Cool Davis, but I'm going to use them as an example. Cool Davis's programming is mainly targeting people who could put solar on their roof or purchase an electric vehicle. I am neither of those people, and that's the kind of a system that we've kind of created here. Is a lot of the services when it comes to environmental action and adaptation are really aimed at people who have time and money and control over their housing situation. And so, the first thing I think that we need to do better is engage with property owners who are renting. There's this mismatch of this misalignment of incentives when you're renting a property to actually engage in any energy efficiency upgrades, because you as the owner of the property are the one who could make these upgrades primarily. But the renter is the one who actually saves money by reducing their footprint. So because of this kind of mismatch and the just lack of general understanding of, what uses electricity and what, how I could shift my behavior in general, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that we could be taking advantage of when it comes to this. I think for me, that's the biggest thing I see in Davis, is just that we're so focused on these high cost solutions that we don't even engage with a lower income population when we're talking about these solutions.
Yeah, I think, so again, on the downtown plan, the comment has been made at the highest levels of city management that when we talk about expanding affordable housing downtown, affordable housing requirements downtown, the argument is like, it's super expensive, we can't do it. Like, we're just writing that off. And when people say we can't do something, I'm like what? We can't fly to a distant planet and put people there? Because we did. We can't, we can't fly. We did. We can't do like we can. And the question needs to be framed from, can we do this, to how can we do this? And if it becomes mandated, then it's going to happen. Like, can we have 25% affordable housing downtown? I don't know. Can we have more than zero? Absolutely, yes. And if we don't, then if we don't have any, right? How honest can we be with ourselves that we have an equitable community? How honest can we be with ourselves that we're actually being inclusive? And right, inclusivity runs the gamut of everything. And to say, well, we're not going to be inclusive here, but we're going to be inclusive over there, right? It just doesn't wash. So how does it show up in environmentalism? So I think one thing that Kelsey alluded to was the conversation. When we're talking about environmentalism, when we're talking about getting information and outreach, community engagement, we're engaging with the higher end of the economic spectrum. But the impacts, again, are going down disproportionately to the lower end of the economic spectrum. So, wow, and affordable healthy food. I'm not even sure how to address that. But the thing is that healthy food is actually more affordable, right? If you go to the store and get the stuff and make 5 salads for your family, it's cheaper than going to a restaurant and buying 5 salads. And that's any restaurant, fast food or otherwise. But again, there's a time thing. And if you've got the time to do that, great. And if you don't, you don't. Sorry, Kelsey, you were going to say something.
No, so I was just going to say, oh, shoot. Oh, I lost it. And the conversations we're having aren't about making hard choices. Even when we're having these conversations with, high socioeconomic status, generally white communities, right? We're saying, they're asking, hey, should I put solar on my house? And we're showing them all of the ways they can save money on it. And same thing for electric cars and this stuff. But what would be more helpful is if they took their bike for one trip a week. But that's actually asking them to do something that is changing their behavior rather than doing something that just costs them money. And so I think that a lot of these conversations are being aimed at rich people because we aren't asking anyone to change their behavior ever. We're asking them to spend their money.
That's an interesting point.
And we need to shift that conversation, and just shifting that conversation from a spend your money to a change your behavior automatically makes it a more inclusive conversation, because I can change my behavior. I choose to only bike. I don't have a car. Yes, I live 3 miles from downtown on the edge of town, but that's fine. I don't need a car. I am a healthy young individual. I can bike everywhere, and we generally have the infrastructure to make it possible. I'm pretty comfortable on the road, so I'm lucky I don't need a low stress network. But yeah, shifting this conversation from here's how you can spend your money to help to here's how you can change your behavior to help, I think would make a huge difference.
I think another way that classism, racism, and they're again very closely tied, is for instance, is this opportunity zone. I don't know how many people know about this opportunity zone thing. So there is a federal program that basically gives tax breaks for redeveloping areas in certain zones. And those zones were picked on more or less, and I think just one criteria. They are census tracts that have below average economic, median income. So that's, I don't know another word for that, but gentrification. And so one of the things is that it's taking places, the goal is, right, to redevelop. So it's taking apartment complexes or whatever that currently have low economic people and building new. Well, do you think that in a new building, Lincoln 40, Sterling, Nishi, that there are going to be low income people able to afford those apartments? And people will say, well, there are affordable components to each of those. And I will say, yeah, and the projected rents for those affordable complexes units are really high. They're actually not that affordable. And the worst is the Davis Commons project, where the affordable units are actually more expensive than the market rate units on campus, which are more expensive than market rate units in town. So defining these things with a mathematical equation is okay. But in fact, when an apartment complex gets built, how many affordable units are you displacing if you're going to do that? And some units in Davis are affordable because they're a wreck. There's no question, I've lived in them. But there are also affordable units that are not a wreck and that are in good shape. And they're not super swanky, but that's because they're affordable, either capital A affordable or lowercase.
Thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of things that Davis could focus on to kind of try to help educate people and get them to change their behavior, and then also make it more equitable to live here. I have a question that's kind of adjacent maybe. So I was reading recently about how trees a lot of times at this point are planted and they're only planting the male trees. And I know that Davis has a really huge problem with allergies, and that only having male trees increases allergies because you don't have a mix. So I don't know if either of you know anything about that, or if you know the sex of the trees that get planted in Davis, and if that has an impact on why so many people have allergies here.
I will say that as a board member of Tree Davis and as the former chair of the Tree Commission, I don't really know anything about that. I did not know that that male trees were primarily getting planted. I know there are certainly some species that that the male trees are preferred because of odor and because of mess, basically. But I didn't know it was. I don't know how ubiquitous that is. So I'll be honest and say I don't have a real answer for that.
Yeah, as someone who does not focus on trees, but has extremely terrible allergies, I can't say that I know anything about this either. I thought I was sick for for months in late winter, early spring, my first year in Davis, because I couldn't breathe. My throat was just, I could barely speak. It was terrible. And I went to the doctor and they're like, yeah, it's just your allergies. And I told them I'd been taking allergy medicine every day. And they said, no, you need more allergy medicine. So, when it's when it's that season here, I get needles poked in my face and take 2 different kinds of allergy medicine twice a day, even though they're 24-hour medicine, because otherwise I just can't even function. So I would love to see more female trees, I guess. And I think that's, this is exactly the kind of thing that engaging with a broader audience when we're having these conversations brings up, right? That's something that Larry and I didn't know about and don't really have an idea about. And so, we need Jordan to be a part of these conversations when we're thinking about planting trees and choosing which trees to plant. And, if we do so strategically, it's having trees that make a little bit more of a mess or don't smell as nice. We can avoid putting those directly along a road so that it's not, something that Public Works has to deal with, that sort of a thing. But I don't see why we can't find space for them.
Yeah, and I think, so including people in the conversation, right? That's outreach and engagement. That's true engagement. And getting those other viewpoints that, again, Kelsey and I were like, oh, really? Cool. I'm sure we're both going to get on Wikipedia, right? As soon as this is over and be like, wow, really? Male trees. And there is an article in the chat that someone posted, so that Jordan posted. So yeah, we can all start following up on this. But there's also a disconnect between nature and our culture, that this seems like one of those unintended consequences of. So we think, oh, well, these things have this problem, so we're only going to do these things. Well, they have another problem. So you actually didn't solve a problem, you exchanged a problem, right? And maybe it's just better if we don't tinker with things as quite as much. But on the other hand, if you have information, you want to use it to make choices, right? So there you are. Anyway,
it kind of comes when you said we just exchange one problem for another, it kind of takes me back to the idea of privacy versus community. Well, we've chosen privacy and kind of created a problem where we don't even necessarily realize is there, and that's this community that doesn't exist. And so yeah, if we pull back that privacy just a little bit, yes, that can be a problem for some people, but you get this other thing that is wonderful. And you get to bake banana bread with your with your neighbors who you're slowly learning Spanish from. And it's really,
it's rewarding.
Some of these trade-offs that we have to think about making, there's not an easy choice, but some of them, there is. And we just have to decide that that's a choice that we're willing to make.
Right.
Okay, great. So now we've reached the middle portion of our discussion, and we're going to start answering some of the audience questions that have been put into the chat. So the first one says, trees in parking lots disproportionately affect renters as apartment complexes are buildings surrounded by seas of black asphalt. Given the heat island effect, can you comment on the city's lack of enforcement of current tree land that requires 50% parking lot shade?
Yeah, so a lot of these ordinances don't have a great way. We don't have a good way to enforce them. So I'm going to give an example of another one that I've been dealing with a lot, and that's green waste. As a board member of Bike Davis, and a full-time biker, I hate having green waste on the streets. And sometimes it's in the bike lanes, and sometimes it's, in places where you're not allowed to put green waste in the streets because it's in my way as a biker. And we don't have any way to enforce that ordinance. So I'm not sure about this ordinance on trees, but my guess is that we don't have a great way to enforce that either. You can report that there's green waste in the street and no one really does anything. Sometimes they'll try and talk to the person that, if it's obviously in front of a house, they'll try to, get the attention of the person who made this mistake, but that's the extent of it. And so my guess is that, similarly, it's not easy. We don't have a good structure for enforcing an ordinance on tree cover of parking.
Yeah, as a member of the Tree Commission, it's what we're dealing with right now. And by the way, just a plug, the tree ordinance public comment period ends at the end of this month. So please look it over again if you are privileged and have time. You can find it on the city's website and put in public comments there. You can also send them to the Tree Commission or just send them directly to city manager or city council. But the tree ordinance, and so ordinances without enforcement are, I don't want to say useless, but I think I have to. Right? Like, okay, I didn't do it. What are you going to do? There's no enforcement. That's a big issue we're trying to put into the new version of the tree ordinance. And we'll see how far that goes. The Tree Commission is obviously advisory to the city council, so it's their call in the end. But having that and enforcing that is terrible. The city is rife with tree planting plans, landscape plans that passed muster during project review and the project application process, and then have terrible shade in parking lots. There's also a subcommittee with the Natural Resources Commission and the Tree Commission, and we're talking about the parking lot ordinance and how we're gonna deal with that. And one of the ways we need to deal with it is enforcement. I mean, there are a lot of issues here: pavement versus permeable paving, but again, as people pointed out, as the question pointed out, the disproportionately people in apartments don't have the trees that other people do. And how do we change that? We change it by code and enforcement of that code. So
and decreasing the amount of parking at apartment complexes, because right now the when you're looking to build in Davis, you have to have at least one parking spot per unit.
Mm-hmm.
We need parking maximums, not minimums. Right? And so obviously this isn't going to solve all of the current problems, but let's not make any more issues, right?
No.
Let's stop creating more problems. The other thing that that could be really useful is some sort of monetary incentive for decreasing parking. So where I live, parking is free. All of the apartment complexes that I talked to when I was looking for housing last summer, free parking.
Right.
That needs to change. I mean, when you're talking about, I think about students specifically here, when I'm thinking about whether or not I had a car during undergrad, which I never did because parking was expensive in Madison. It was like $100 a month to get a parking spot. It was insane. And actually none of the places I ever lived even had parking for us. But this is the kind of thing, is if I give a student free parking, well, then the car they were driving when they were 16 and 17 is probably going to come to school with them. If I tell them that it's going to cost them a little bit, then they or the parents will be like, you don't need a car at school. You don't need that. And, you know, to be honest, the majority of students can bike everywhere they need to go. And
Assuming
so
they live in Davis.
assuming they live in Davis. That's why I said the majority of students. Yeah, I know that there, you know, obviously there are always going to be exceptions to these things, but you know, having parking that actually costs something creates a trade-off where there wasn't one before. And then, you know, you can maybe have less spots because you don't need them all, because not everyone is bringing a car or having 2 cars for their household when they only need one. And, you know, we need to create the right incentives. And we're talking about the environment today, and transportation is, you know, over half of our footprint in Davis.
74%. Right.
We need to do better. We need
Yeah.
to get people out of their cars.
And as Alan Miller in the chat commented, that the parking maximums thing and the parking thing, it's all, of course, tied to transportation. So it needs to be tied to changes in transportation. And so building, you know, kind of denser housing and stuff on places that are already part of our transit system, you know, are really good. One of the things I liked about the Davis Commons or the University Commons project was that it is at a mall, a 1-story mall. And I actually think that the issues with that could have been solved by, again, community engagement, getting the developers together with the neighbors and saying, let's work this out, we can do this. Different rant, different webinar, I won't go there. But the point is that there is a trend, right? Every shopping mall in Davis is a transit hub. They are all on transit corridors. They all have transit stops already there. And they are all 1 story, right? So if we do this kind of multi-use zoning, multi-use design, where we've got people living there, the shops will come to reflect more the people in those apartments, because that's who's going to shop there. And the transit kind of becomes more doable, right? You've got density where you've already got a bus stop. That bus is going to be more viable. Autonomous shuttles, that's another webinar, and I'd love to talk about that too. Are a great thing to really try and make our transit doable. But you kind of need the numbers along the corridors, along the transit corridors, to make our existing transit really viable.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
think oops, sorry, go ahead.
All good. We're lucky to have transit in the first place. I mean, Unitrans would not exist without the university. And so thank you, university, for giving us a local bus system.
Actually, it's a student-run organization, and the university does not put money into it. Just gonna throw that out there.
Thank you, students. Yes, we would not have it without that. And I think that, you know, a lot of the things in Davis we would not have without the university. And so we just, a little thank you to the university. There's also a lot of expertise that we should be taking more advantage of at the university, especially when it comes to the environment, climate, you know, trees, for example. I am sure there are, you know, a plethora of experts who would be, you know, happy to lend their expertise or actually get paid to utilize their expertise.
Or have a grad student work on the problem.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right? The point of research is to solve questions that the real world cares about. And so if we have questions that we care about, you know, we can get the answers, hopefully. So I see I just want to, there's a comment that the city provides the lion's share of funding. Correct. However, the city would not be funding a bus system if the university were not here. A city of 60, 70,000 people would not warrant, of this size, would most likely not warrant its own public transit.
Yeah, I think this discussion about public transit is particularly interesting because I'm a former bus driver. I used to work for Unitrans for almost 2 years. So when you talk about like building infrastructure and adding on to where the bus lines already are, like that makes perfect sense. But then you also have to think about like how to increase the amount of service and how the amount of passengers will impact bus drivers, especially in the winter. It gets absolutely insane. The amount of students and the amount of non-students who take the buses in the winter is incredibly high compared to the rest of the year. And so it makes it a lot more difficult for the buses to be on time, for the drivers to get to where they need to be. So there also needs to be like an add-on of how is this going to impact like the other aspects of bus drivers and bus lines.
For sure. Yeah, so I know that really the only time I take the bus, unless my bike is stolen, the times that I take the bus are when it's raining, because sometimes I just don't want a bike in the rain. And so yeah, those winter buses are absolutely insane. I used to live right on the B line, and luckily I would get on. I was at the like furthest part of the B line from the university, and so I would get on, it'd be empty, and by the time we got back to the MU, we would all have to be standing like this with our backpacks between our feet. And one of the big issues is this varied service that we kind of need. We need more buses in the winter during during the school year, and we do already change service during the school year versus the summer. And so why are we not doing that for the seasons? I'm not sure. You could easily have different service on during the rainy months when people utilize the buses a hell of a lot more.
Yeah. And I think autonomous shuttles really help that, because your basic service can be drivers. And then you can stop running an autonomous shuttle and not lay anybody off, right? So there are a lot of, and on the really major lines, I mean, the best transit system is one that you don't have to learn. The cities where I've used transit are the ones I didn't have to think about it. So Hawaii, I've been pretty privileged for a lot of things, but one is travel. So Hawaii, the buses ran every 10 minutes.
Right.
You didn't have to learn the system. You just stood at a bus stop, and when the door opened, hey, do you go to? No, I don't. Okay, next bus, next. And you're there. Here, when it's a half hour or an hour between a bus, you can't do that, right? Like, again, we get to this equity thing where people who have the time can maybe afford that, but the people who don't have that time, who are trying to get to a menial job and who will get fired if they don't make it on time, they can't afford to do that. So
absolutely.
Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, my therapist is in Woodland, and so when I wanted to go to Woodland, now obviously we're just on video call, but when I would go to Woodland once a week, I would make a whole day of it, and most people can't do that. Right? I would get on the bus, because there wasn't a bus that would get me there just on time, so I was either going to get there 10 minutes late or 50 minutes early. And so I would just go a couple hours early and sit at a coffee shop and get some work done, and then go. And then, afterwards, there wasn't another bus for 45 minutes. So I would, go and sit at another place and get some work done and wait until, okay, now it's 10 minutes until the bus is going to come. I'll go out and wait at the stop. But there was no, most people can't make a day out of a quick trip like that. Luckily, grad school has a lot of flexibility. So yeah, it would be fantastic if the buses could run more often. And I think, maybe that's how we add that's exactly how you would add buses during the rain is. So you have your regular schedule, but then you decrease the time in between those buses. And it would be great if transit actually ran every 10 or 15 minutes here. Unfortunately, that would be very unaffordable for Unitrans. And so I think, that's another thing that we need to talk about when we're thinking about where we're putting housing and what we're asking from developers is to actually be a part of funding the public transit lines that people living there will be utilizing. And so when people were talking about DISC, when that was on the ballot, there was some kind of blurry thing about funding something. And I was like, okay, there are already bus lines that go right past this property, right? There's the Z line, there's the A line, the P and the Q run past there. So like, just tell me how much of those lines you're gonna fund, right? Like we can figure out how much those lines cost to run. Would you like them to run, do you think you would like them to run more often? Well, then it's gonna cost you this. If you want them to run as they are, this is what it will cost you. And like actually have something laid out so that our current public transit isn't so dependent. It's really dependent on public funding. And that's the idea of public transit, which is fair. That's how it should be. However, we can ask for things that we just haven't been asking for. And we can get really specific in the plans so that we actually end up with what we want. Rather than like, here's a couple $100,000. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points. Okay, so our next question says, with dense housing comes the challenge of not being able to enjoy the night sky as much. How do you suggest this issue be addressed?
So yeah, I think where the person is coming at is if you have tall buildings, narrow streets, right, you see less of the sky. True. But you see less of the sky with street lights and building lights. And the answer is, I think, looking at that question in a larger context. So if you decrease the amount of night sky that you can see downtown, right, that's one building form, right? If you have all these tall buildings, narrow streets. But another way to decrease the night sky and the amount that you can see it is to build out with sprawl until you get these huge light pollution areas that reach farther and farther. And for anybody, so I've been in Davis 26 years and I've seen Woodland moving south and Davis moving north, and they're gonna meet. Well, then we've lost all that night sky. So while you may lose night sky in a specific place, I think, regionally, you're actually preserving a lot more of it. Another issue that comes to this is totally random. Again, another webinar for another day, but it's kind of related, which is subsidizing food and the cost of food. And the result of that is, my point, and I do have one, the result of that is that food as land as ag land has much less value than land as residential land. And that's because food is so heavily subsidized. It's another lever that pushes us towards sprawl, which I'm not a fan of.
Yeah, I really like Larry's point about, yes, you might lose the night sky in, when you no longer live in a single family home and have a backyard where you can just go out and have your 6-foot fence all around you, and look up. That's not how I like to enjoy the night sky. I don't think Davis, I grew up out in the country, in Wisconsin. And so I know that the stars we see in Davis is just nothing compared to what's actually there. And so if I want to go see the night sky, I get out of town.
Yeah. And the same. And I did grow up in a single family residential tract home environment, and you still had to go out of town,
Yeah.
get away from it to get to the sky because of all the street lights. And Alan Miller talked about amber street lights being part of the answer. True, but no, I don't know. I'm actually not a fan of streetlights. And again, another discussion for another webinar is, do they actually make you safer? And the answer is not. It's not necessarily.
When there is green waste in the bike lane, they make you safer. Because you can see it.
It's a point. It's a point. Yeah. Point, Kelsey. Okay.
but fair. That's what I want streetlights for, is for when I'm biking and I don't know if there's going to be something in my path. I have a nice headlight, Alan, but it's still, you don't see it until you're about 15, 20 feet away. And I've got a dog running next to me who is not going to change, change speeds with me that fast. Yes, I do have a nice headlight. Yeah, it would.
So as you can see, all these things are interdependent, right?
Exactly. And we have to make sure that everyone is a part of that conversation so that we can hear these different things.
Right.
And say, oh, well, Larry has opinions about, not having streetlights and them not making you safer. And I have never really thought about them as something that makes me feel safer. I've thought of in terms of, some sort of crime, just as in terms of this, I want to see what's in front of me because I'm moving fast.
They work both ways, right?
Yeah.
People can see you too if you're under the street light.
That's true.
Anyway, separate discussion, separate webinar.
Okay, so the next question says, we have dense sprawl in Davis. The further out from downtown, the smaller the lots in Davis or larger apartment complexes. The reality is that people who live in denser areas are more dependent on cars. Is this an example of protecting social capital of incumbent residents or entitlement of older people who were just lucky and got windfall by buying in the right place at the right time? And then there's a separate question, how do we be fair yet create better places?
Well, I think sure, there's definitely buying in the right place at the right time is huge, right? And how much we can go back and change that, I don't know. But actually, so for instance, J Street has apartment buildings all the way up to Covell. So they are not very close to downtown. They're not super close. They're not super far away from the Nugget Mall. I don't know actually the name of that mall, at the corner of Poline and Covell. So, okay, but J is also, because of all those apartment complex, J is also a transit corridor, right? There are buses that go along that. And so when you get that density, Oakshade Mall, thank you. This is why you have community engagement. So when you get that density, you can have transit, and you don't need to be right next to things. Again, it's better. What about if there was somewhere around, what would it be, Alice or Drexler, there was another, not a mall, but what if some of those apartment buildings also on the ground floor had coffee shops or public laundromats or a grocery store? I mean, grocery stores turn out to have a huge impact on life and the automobile, because everybody goes to the grocery store, right? And so again, designing around that is super important. And one of the things that is key and that kind of comes in and out of these conversations is we have totally designed around the car. So for instance, question to the community: are there any sociologists or psychologists on our planning staff? Give you all the time you need. That's all the time you need. No, there isn't. What? Like, we need to plan around people. At the end of the day, we're not even planning around people. We're planning around cars. We're planning, I mean, engineers do a great job. This is not a diss on engineers. It's that they do a great job on what they're trained to do. And what they're trained to do is not to plan around people, right? It's about speeds and corner radii and blah, 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 and all this stuff. What we need is to think about people, how best to plan around people, and how people live, so that we can build for how they live, not how they drive.
So I think, yeah, we have a lot of larger apartment complexes kind of more towards the edge of town. Along Covell has a ton. I used to live up near the Save Martin Safeway. I was in a half of a duplex, but there were apartment buildings all around us, and that's maybe only a mile and a half from campus and downtown. But it'd be cool if those people could be only half a mile from those things in the central Davis neighborhoods that do have these large lots, and they have beautiful, quiet streets, and it's wonderful. However, it does push the rest of us towards the edge of town. I currently live down by the South Davis Nugget. I can walk to get my groceries at Nugget, which is great. But I also know people who drive even that short distance to get their groceries, because you don't want to carry them around. And so again, I come back to kind of a combination of a culture shift of actually inducing people to change their behavior, and actually planning for what we want to see. If we look at the housing element that's happening right now, the areas where they've identified increases in density are all nowhere near downtown and campus. They're all towards the edge of town. I don't know why that's happening, but that's the sort of thing that we need to be talking about. Is, does it really make sense to have dense housing this far away?
Yeah.
And the answer is probably it's not great. It would be better if we could get it closer.
Well, yeah, I think I would add to that. I would say yes, but maybe we need more downtowns. So as Davis grows, I mean, there's no way it's not possible. I love our downtown. End of story. But there's no way our downtown can support all the shopping needs of Davis. It can't do it. So what about having multiple downtowns, right? What about taking the shopping malls we have, and they're well spaced out, and turning them into kind of alternate downtowns or other town centers, so that we've got these centers, and guess what? They're already connected to each other by transit corridors. And so we end up with kind of the Parisian arrondissement model, where you've basically start getting separate downtowns, separate cores, and that those cores provide the goods and services that those areas need, right? So every one of those malls has a shop, has a grocery store, and most of them, in fact, already do. And they have other, they have a cafe, and they have some restaurants, and they have a place to get your glasses, and an they have an optometrist, they have a financial planner, they have a backpack store, I don't know, whatever, right? The needs that the stores that are in those places will be determined by what the customers who use them want. I hear people complain about downtown and how there aren't any, restaurants they're really nice restaurants, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know why? Because every time we have one, they fail. So if you want something, you need to do it. People need to be much more proactive about what goes on with the town. So if the businesses downtown are catering to students, it's because the students use downtown, right? It's not top down driven, it's bottom up driven. It is supply demand. So making those mall areas denser, having a bunch of residential in those, creating the need and creating this kind of multiple downtown model, I think is a good way to go.
Yeah, so I have a quick question for you. Do you ever want to spend time in those areas right now, though?
Time in what areas?
In these malls, the South Nugget, the North Nugget, Safeway.
No, I see where you're going, and the short epigrammatic answer is no, but there are some, right? There is outdoor seating. I call it the Dancing Pig Mall.
Yeah.
Right on Sycamore, and so right, there is some outdoor seating there at Jackson, at the bagel shop, at Noah's. Great. I'll sit out there. I've had many meetings at the tables outside Noah's Bagels. The outdoor seating at Taqueria Guadalajara in the South Davis Nugget Mall, right? I've sat out there and had long conversations. The mall, the Anderson Mall, or the Oakshade Mall that we were just talking about, outdoor seating, why doesn't it have outdoor seating? It is filled with restaurants, and there is nowhere except inside those restaurants to eat. It is like,
Yeah.
So, right. And so we need to make those places to hang out. There's also,
I totally agree. I
the
think,
space between the North Davis Nugget and the CVS, it's got this courtyard with smaller shops that go back behind, right? People hang out there all the time. Anyway, so
I totally agree. It's just that I think about, my patterns is when I come downtown, I may stop at, 2 or 3 or 4 different places. When I go to one of those places, I go for what I need and I leave. Even if I'm getting a meal and I sit outside and eat there, I go there, I get my meal, I sit there, I leave. It doesn't create that same flow as a downtown, the way that they're designed currently, right?
Exactly.
It's not fun to be in a place next to a big parking lot. I'm sorry, it is not. I don't want to be next to all of these cars driving, the noise is annoying.
Sure.
There's no fun to look at.
Yeah, the outdoor seating at Dos Coyotes in North Davis, right? And you're out there at their outdoor seating, and there's a parking spot right there, and they come up
literally
and the headlights
right
are on,
there,
and you're like, okay, dinner's just going really well, right? So yeah, they need to be designed, again, not around cars, but around people.
Right.
For sure.
Thank you for this I have learned truly so much during this webinar. Thank you so much. It is 2:30, and unfortunately that is our time. Thank you to our panelists for joining us today and spending the last 90 minutes with us. For the audience, thank you for coming out. We'll be posting the video in the next day or so on the Vanguard website, so feel free to share with your friends that couldn't make it today. If you want to keep following the developments of the tree ordinance and other environmental and city topics, we publish articles in the city news desk every week, and Lauren just put our social media accounts in the chat. Panelists, if you have websites or contact information that you would like, or social media, you can definitely put those also in the chat. You can also attend, they reference the tree commission meetings live, And you can also, I know a public comment period that's going on right now until the end of May that you can give your input in. So thank you everyone for joining us. Also, the City News Desk and the Davis Vanguard cover pressing local news, and we are able to do so through the support of the community. So if you would like to become a monthly subscriber and help us continue our important coverage, you should feel free to go to the Vanguard website and you can sign up there. So thank you again, and we will turn it back to David.
Thanks, and just a note that there is a tree commission article up on the site, so you can read that as well, davisvanguard.org. Thanks everyone for coming out, and we'll have another webinar on June the 4th.
Thank you, everyone. And thanks, David, Lauren, and Jordan for hosting and herding the cats, as it were.
Thanks.
Thanks to you too, Kelsey. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Larry. Thank you, everyone.